Welcome to the Tintri Intelligent Infrastructure Webcast. I'm Clay Ryder. In this webcast, we will explore how intelligent infrastructure can provide a different experience by delivering protection without disruption so you can avoid being a victim of ransomware. Today, we will hear from a guest expert, offer some additional resources for your benefit, and have an open Q&A session at the end. If you'd like to ask your question during the presentation, please enter it into the Q&A or chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll queue it up for discussion later in the program. Without further delay, I'd like to welcome our guest, Tomer Hagai, to the webcast. Welcome, Tomer.
Thanks, Clay. I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you for being here today. Please tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Tomer Hagai. I've been in the IT space for quite over 20 years. Started my career on the networking side with network management, automation, analytics, led to self-service and other orchestration. I like to speak in public events, webinars, been awarded distinguished speakers in a couple of those. And I'm currently serving as the CTO and head of product management for Tintri, mainly focusing on the VM Store product line.
Well, thank you, Tomer. Now I'm going to launch a poll so we can better understand who's in our audience today. So if you wouldn't mind, please just click off and the response that best describes your role, and we'll be on our way shortly. Yeah, we'll give it a few more seconds and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, well, we've got a mixture of some technical folks out there and always that elusive category of other, which is one of those things that everyone is special in some other kind of way. Well, thank you all very much for sharing that with us. Let's move on with our presentation. One challenge faced by data centers is the potential attack by malevolent software, also known as ransomware. Business interruptions caused by temporary or permanent disruption of access to data and intellectual property can prove to be economically devastating. Even if data access is restored, the brand and customer impact can be severe, if not unrecoverable. Tomer, how prevalent are ransomware attacks?
Yeah, so Clay, unfortunately, ransomware is here. It's growing. It's been with us for, it's a reality for the last few years. And those two graphs from reputable sources show the picture at a high level. The one on the left shows the amount of money, right, the amount of dollars paid daily for just recovering data or rescuing data from encrypted ransomware attacks. Over $100,000 a day that are paid, for those purposes. The graph on the right shows the number of attacks per minute. Now, not all of those attacks are successful. And not all of those attacks are focused on data that is meaningful, but still the numbers are pretty scary with linear growth between 2016 and 2019, and then it's kind of slowed down or is about predicted to be slowing down. And that's a good news, but it's also not that good because it's just ransomware is everywhere, so the growth is slower.
Well, it sounds like ransomware attacks are not isolated incidents that would go away if we simply ignored them for long enough. Given that organizations need to deliver IT services in a safe and predictable fashion, what can be done to mitigate, if not outright prevent, attacks by ransomware?
Yeah, Clay. So this is, a really large topic. Of course, we're not going to cover everything in 30 minutes. And for this session, we wanted to focus on three areas. We're going to dive deeper into two of them. So the first one is really education, and there's nothing that can replace, educating the users. It's all about making sure they won't click links or open files that they don't need to open. Still the most common attack starts with phishing attempts, successful phishing attempts, and making sure users not fall for those is very important. Now, the two other areas that we will talk about quite in greater detail are the two on the right. So protecting your data and then visualize and analyze the data.
I see. Some of these would seem like common sense approaches, but I suspect that the technical requirements and implementation considerations would be considerable and very widely for each business. What are the common approaches to implementation today, and what might be a different option? What are the pros and cons of each?
Yeah, so we'll start with data protection. And, the common methods for data protection always start with a backup. And backup are still, the first go-to method. They're super important. They're, in many cases, the first line of defense. But backups are not perfect, right? It could be slow, of course, slow to backup, slow to restore. Backup themselves are prone to attacks because, ransomware attackers, hackers, right, figure that if they can get their hands on the backup repository, then, it's gold, right? And so they focus on that. That becomes a trend now. Another thing is that backup could be costly. If you want to back up your entire environment, that has a cost associated to it. And also, you need to, in a case where you do need to use the backup, it's pretty difficult to find where to restore from, or what is the restore point that you want to go with in order not to lose too much data, but still, make sure that you got rid of the ransomware that was installed at some point in time. The second method, which is pretty common, is using snapshots. Now, we can assume that at this point, every storage array has some sort of snapshots, but these are typically at the LUN or volume level. So you snapshot a pretty large amount of data, and then if you want to restore from that snapshot, that could be a lengthy operation because you have to dig the application or the VM that you're looking for from this LUN or volume, this big bucket of data that you need to start looking into. So if we want to go with VM snapshots, these are typically offered from vSphere, but these come at a cost by themselves. So they're really good with the granularity, but it's hard to schedule them, and they're not recommended to be running in production for a longer or extended period of time because of the overhead, the performance overhead, and other implications that they might have.
Well, I suspect that most any organization is already taking these actions, as they hardly seem new or revolutionary. But I sense that this is quite labor intensive and does not provide a sufficiently granular result. It seems like another example of using the proverbial hatchet as opposed to a scalpel in the quest for data protection. What is a different approach in protecting against ransomware that can provide a different user experience?
Yeah, Clay, so that's absolutely right? So we have those two methods, but neither is perfect. And what if we can actually have the best of both worlds? So going with snapshots that are actually VM level and have everything we need could be a better solution. And that's exactly what we offer on the Tintri VM store with our VM level snapshots. So essentially the best of both worlds. It's VM level granular. You have the flexible scheduling capabilities. There's no performance overhead. The recovery is really immediate. You can bring up a VM or a recovered VM from a snapshot in a matter of seconds. You don't have to wait for, copying data from backup or other repositories. You also have all the analytics you need to plan for those snapshots. You know how much space they take, and you can store them in different locations, right? So a lot of options, right? You can store those snapshots locally in the cloud on a different storage system. So everything all together in one solution. Now, by no means we're saying, you know, snapshots are replacements for backups, but this could be the new first line of defense for you if you're not using those type of snapshots today.
Well, interesting. Intelligent infrastructure views the solution from a completely different perspective in that it's VM-centric as opposed to storage unit-centric. This seems to address the granularity issue where a ransomware outbreak within one virtual machine would not necessitate corrective action against a much larger data set, such as a LUN or a volume. Can you show us how taking and recovering snapshots work differently in intelligent infrastructure?
Sure, Clay. So this is not a demo, right? We can of course have follow-ups with live demos and everything. But I did prepare a few screenshots to show you how this works. So the first one is about the scheduling or the policy that we apply. And this is a view from Tintri Global Center that shows the settings for a VM. And you can look at those snapshot schedules, right? So for a VM, you can have an hourly, daily, weekly schedule. You can have different retentions, so different intervals, different retentions, and you can also select the consistency of that snapshot. So it could be a crash consistent or application consistent. And one thing to note here is that, you know, because we're talking about the VM store that understands what a VM is, right? It has the intelligence, the built-in intelligence to understand the VM, the operations that come from that VM. Crash consistent snapshots on a VM store are more reliable compared to crash consistent snapshots on other arrays. Now, this is a whole nother topic that we can spend, you know, an hour talking about, but essentially what we apply is write order preservation to make sure that the array or the VM store takes the snapshot at the same point in time for all the virtual disks of the VM, making the snapshot very reliable. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking, you know, okay, so that's nice for VM level, but what if I have 1,000 VMs or, you know, 10,000? I don't want to go one by one and apply that. And that's where we have the concept of service groups, which I'm not showing here on this screenshot, but essentially it's applying the same policies on groups of VMs. So that's where we can say, you know, all the VMs that have DB in the name will get a certain policy, or all the VMs that have VDI in their name, or all the VMs that reside on a specific, in a certain hypervisor folder will get that policy that we apply for them. And the next part that I wanted to show is recovery. So in this case, we saw that same VM, this VCSA management, right? We had the snapshot policy for it. Now, if we want to restore that VM from a snapshot, we have multiple ways of doing that. I chose one of them for this presentation. And it's really as easy as right-clicking that VM on Tintri Global Center, clicking the restore VM, and then, you know, a dialog comes up with just selecting the snapshot that we want to restore from. And since we had an hourly snapshot schedule, we can see those hourly snapshots. I just took that screenshot yesterday, as you can see, and we can select a snapshot and just click the restore button. So it's just as easy as that. And since, you know, we're talking about intelligence and things that might save you even further, when you restore a VM from a snapshot, the array automatically creates what we call a security snapshot. So if you want to go back to the time before that restore operation, you can do that. And you can restore to any snapshot in the chain, go back and forth between, you know, those different points in time without any restrictions.
Well, this seems in stark contrast with how snapshots work in standard infrastructure. Granularity seems to be the key to efficiency and speed. Earlier, you mentioned that visualization and analytics are part of the protection solution. Would you share with us how the analytics provided by intelligent infrastructure helps combat, if not prevent, the scourge of ransomware?
Sure, Clay. So, snapshots, data protection, right, is one area, obviously super important. The other part that we seem to neglect or forget about in some cases is the analytics side, and that's where having the right visualization and analytics can help you see exactly what's going on with your VMs, identify any inconsistencies or points in time where things just look a bit weird or out of the ordinary. And I'm going to show an example for that. This is good for understanding what's going on a regular basis, but also to find a point in time. So if you want to recover from a snapshot or even from a backup, you really want to know what point in time to select when you're doing that, because restoring multiple times to find the right point in time is time consuming, right? And Clay mentioned the impact on the business and the brand while this outage occurs. So we want to recover as fast as we can, and knowing the right point in time is really critical. Now, this is a big area, and I prepared just a couple of screenshots here as well. And this starts with this graph that shows an increased space consumption. Now, you might ask yourself, this could be normal, right? This is an increased space consumption here at around January of 2020. But we've actually had quite a good number of incidents where customers reached out with a support case where they actually ran out of space because of ransomware. So if you're not keeping track on those things, you might face a similar situation, because ransomware, obviously there's different types and they behave differently, but some of them encrypt the data, which makes it take more space on the storage array because it's now less efficient to compress that data. So encrypted data compresses, less than can be less efficient to store with compression on deduplication on the storage array. So it takes more space. And in this graph, we see this increase in space, and that's where we want to look deeper and see exactly what happened at that point in time. And again, if ransomware attack took place at that point in time, this could be a first sign. Now, again, this is a really high level, quick overview. There's some other methods and other ways or other areas we can look at, but this is just a quick example. So if we spot something like that, we want to know what's going on at that point in time. So we can just click that graph at the point of January of 2020 and see what are the contributors, or who are the contributors to that space consumption at that point in time. And here I just highlighted that there's one VM that consumes a lot of space. We don't know if that's normal or not. So what we can do is actually go up there in the filter and change the time, right? So January 25 had that profile. Now, if we go back and forth in time to January 24th, 23, or 26, we might see how things change. And then we can click that bar to see exactly which VMs are represented by those bars. This will obviously allow us to identify some issues that could be anomalies, right? Some issues that could be happening due to ransomware, or even other issues that would be beneficial to know about.
Well, thank you, Tomer, for highlighting for our audience how intelligent infrastructure delivers a different experience in protecting your environment from ransomware compared to standard infrastructure. For those who would like to learn more, what would you recommend?
Sure. So there is a lot of information out there We have several videos. There's content on Tintri.com. There's also explore.tintri.com where you can experience the Tintri VM store experience by yourself. Of course, we'll be happy to deliver a live demonstration of those areas we covered today and quite more, right? And again, we just touched on those areas. There's really a world of information, features, capabilities on those two areas of analytics and data protection and snapshots. And if you've attended VMworld, there is a past presentation in their video library there that talks specifically about snapshots. That's the one I delivered last year in San Francisco. It's a pretty deep dive on snapshots, on the vSphere snapshots. So, the pros and the cons, how they work, and more information there.
Okay, thank you. The first question we have is, how many snapshots are supported per virtual machine?
That's a good point. We have a limit of up to 128 snapshots per VM, and that it doesn't matter, how many VMs you have, up to the limit of what the array itself, what the VM store itself supports. So 128 is the answer.
Another question asked, can I get a copy of the slides? Well, certainly. We will provide you with the slide deck as well as replay information should you wish to share this webcast with your colleagues. Another question asked, can I use automation for some of these operations?
Yeah, another good point. So this is exactly what what we recommend in some areas, right? For large scale environments, everything I described, from scheduling to recovery to way more, can be automated through just simple PowerShell or more advanced REST API calls. All those APIs are open and available for users to automate on.
Are the VM store snapshots immutable to prevent them from getting deleted by ransomware? And if it's not the case, is this a future plan?
So that's actually another good point that I forgot to mention. So the VM store snapshots are outside of the data or management path. So ransomware actually has no way to reach the administrative or to have the administrative access needed in order to delete those snapshots. So you have to be an admin on Tintri Global Center or the VM store itself in order to log in with it and or with that admin access to delete those snapshots. So ransomware would not have that type of access, of course, if passwords are protected appropriately.
How do you recommend having snapshots stored off-site for site recovery needs?
Yeah, so that's another good point. I mean, that could be another 20-minute conversation at least. There are several options to doing that. Snapshots by default are stored locally on the VM store, and on top of that, we can add replication, and replication could be one to many, many to one, and to VM store destinations, so you can have another VM store system on the other side, or it could be an S3 type destination with AWS as an example, or an on-prem S3 repository for storing those snapshots as objects. Now, the advantage with storing those remotely on VM stores is that you can immediately recover and bring those VMs live from the snapshot. If they're stored in AWS, for example, you'll have to download the snapshot to recover it and use it as a VM.
Thank you. In case you're wondering what are some of the other topics coming up in our webcast series, the next topics will include SQL integrated storage, as well as proactively using analytics. Well, thank you all for your questions. Our time together is coming to a close. I'd like to thank today's guest, Homer Agai, CTO for Tintri.
Thank you, Clay.
As well as all of you in the audience for participating. Please remember to check out the other resources we've discussed, and if you have any further questions, please contact your local Tentry representative. Be sure to join with us next time when Sean Myers will talk with us about how intelligent infrastructure can radically improve IT productivity by making management and troubleshooting of SQL Server databases simple at scale. For all of us at Tentry, I'm Clay Ryder. Thanks for participating. I hope you found this time to be well spent.